Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into something I think is super fascinating.
Okay.
The relationship between a country's laws and its economy.
Oh, interesting.
We're looking at some research. It's called Rule of Law, Economic Structure and Development
Okay.
by Roberto M. Samaniego and Juliana Sun.
Okay.
And have you ever wondered, why certain countries are really good at making complex things like airplanes while others focus on simpler products?
Yeah, I mean, you think about like Germany, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They make a lot of cars and high-end manufacturing.
Exactly.
And then other countries, maybe more textiles.
Right. And so this paper is suggesting that
Yeah.
a country's legal system might be the key.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's what we're going to kind of unpack today.
That's really interesting.
So to start, let's define rule of law.
Okay.
It sounds kind of formal and jargony, but basically
Yeah.
it means a system where people can trust that contracts will be honored and their property is safe.
Yeah.
So it's about minimizing corruption and just creating a stable environment for businesses to operate in.
I see. So it's like the bedrock, like the foundation
That's
of
true.
trust in a
Exactly.
the system.
And so when businesses feel secure
Yeah.
and they know they can rely on the system,
Right.
they're more likely to take risks, invest in growth.
Absolutely. Yeah. They don't want to feel like everything could be taken away from them.
Right, exactly.
At any moment.
So that leads us to this really interesting concept from the research.
Okay.
They talk about relationship-specific investments.
Okay.
Now, that sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty straightforward.
Okay.
So imagine a company that
Yeah.
invests in some specialized machinery, right,
Mhm.
that's tailored for a very specific supplier.
Right.
That machinery is incredibly valuable to that specific partnership. But if the deal goes sour,
Right.
it's kind of useless.
It's very specific. Yeah.
Yeah, it's useless elsewhere.
You can't just like
You can't just take it to the
purpose it easily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these investments are all about trust
Right.
and long-term relationships.
Absolutely.
So a company is more likely to make that kind of commitment when they're confident that contracts will be upheld,
Right.
that disputes will be resolved fairly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the rule of law comes in.
I see.
So the researchers didn't just theorize about this.
Okay.
They actually crunched numbers
Okay.
from 189 countries.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of countries.
That's a really broad sample.
Yeah, very broad sample. And so to do this, they looked at broad economic sectors.
Okay.
And to do that, they used data from the International Labor Organization,
Okay. Yeah.
which tracks employment worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Then they also zoomed in on manufacturing, specifically
Okay.
using data from the UN Industrial Development Organization.
How's it getting?
So they have like a really comprehensive view
Right.
of how industries are structured in all these different countries.
Yeah, they're taking like a multi-level look at this.
Exactly.
There's a macro and a micro.
And so what they found is that
Okay.
countries with a stronger rule of law
Yeah.
tended to have a larger share of their economies dedicated to industries that require these relationship-specific investments.
Oh, interesting.
So things like aerospace manufacturing
Right.
or complex electronics,
Yeah.
things that involve custom parts,
Right.
close collaboration between different companies,
A lot of trust.
a lot of trust.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, countries with weaker rule of law
Okay.
tended to have more of those basic industries,
Right.
like textiles
Got it.
or food processing.
So that's really interesting that there's that link
Yeah.
between the rule of law and the types
I
of
think it's right.
industries that a country specializes in.
It's like a strong rule of law creates the conditions for more complex and innovative industries to emerge.
Yeah, it allows them to like kind of move up the value chain.
Exactly. And so it's not just about individual industries.
Okay.
It actually impacts a country's overall economic performance
Right.
as measured by its GDP.
Yeah, the big picture stuff.
The big picture. Yeah. So how did the researchers figure out this link between rule of law and GDP?
Well, they created this model to estimate the impact, and the results were actually pretty surprising.
Correct.
They found that differences in the rule of law could explain a significant portion, somewhere between 29% and 46%,
Oh, wow.
of the variation in GDP per capita.
Okay. So that's a huge amount.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah. So basically, a country's legal system has a way bigger impact on its wealth
It seems like it, yeah,
than we might think.
than we would intuitively think.
So it's like a strong argument for investing in those strong legal institutions.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not just about, fairness or justice. It's actually about
It's about prosperity.
Yeah, economic growth and prosperity.
And they didn't just look at rule of law in isolation.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
They had to consider other things
Yeah.
that might influence a country's economic structure. Things like income levels and technological advancements.
Yeah, because richer countries can probably afford to invest in those more complex industries. Right.
Exactly.
So how did they isolate?
Yeah, so how did they know it was really the rule of law?
Right.
Yeah.
So they used a bunch of different statistical techniques to really try to isolate the effect of the legal system. And what they found was that even after considering all those other factors, the impact of the rule of law on the economic structure remained really significant.
Okay.
It was a strong, independent force shaping the types of industries that could succeed in a country.
Wow. Okay, so it seems like a strong rule of law is crucial for a thriving economy.
Absolutely.
Because it allows those complex industries to develop.
Yeah.
Which ultimately boosts the nation's overall wealth.
It seems like it, yeah.
That's a pretty compelling takeaway.
It is, but remember, this is just kind of the start of our deep dive.
Right, we're setting the stage.
Yeah, we're laying the groundwork.
Okay, so let's dig into the details of this research.
Okay.
And see what else we can find out.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to see what they found in the data.
Me too.
So to get into the nitty-gritty, they actually used 2 different data sets to examine this connection even more closely.
All right, so this is where it gets even more interesting.
Yeah, this is where it gets really fun.
Okay, let's hear it. So we've established this link, right, between rule of law and these more complex industries.
Right, yeah. It seems like there's a connection there.
But how do they actually go about, like, proving that?
Yeah.
It feels kind of abstract.
It's hard to measure something like that.
Yeah. How do you measure something like that?
So they used 2 different data sets to examine this connection.
Okay.
First, they used the ILO data set. Remember, that gives us a broad overview of employment.
Right, across a bunch of countries.
Yeah, 189 countries and 14 different industries.
Okay.
This gives us a really good big picture view.
So we're looking at the whole forest here.
Exactly.
Not just the trees.
Not just individual trees, we're looking at the whole forest.
Okay, I like that analogy.
And then they zoom in on the trees.
Okay.
They use the UNIDO data set to look specifically at manufacturing.
Got it.
So this is a lot more granular data. It covers 28 different manufacturing industries.
Okay, so we have the wide lens and then the close-up.
Exactly. And they wanted to see if the same patterns they saw at the national level held true.
When you zoom in.
When you zoom in.
Okay.
And what they found was really interesting. There was this consistent positive relationship between rule of law and the prominence of industries with those high relationship-specific investments. It was there when they looked at employment numbers.
Okay.
It was there when they looked at the value added by those industries.
Okay.
It was there when they looked at output.
No matter how you slice it.
No matter how you slice it.
Interesting.
The pattern held true.
So a strong rule of law seems to go hand in hand with a more complex industrial base.
It does seem that way.
Okay.
But of course, it's not quite that simple. It's not just...
Strong rule of law equals complex industries.
Exactly.
End of story.
There are other factors that we have to consider.
Right, like we talked about before.
Yeah.
Richer countries might have a different mix.
Exactly. Have more resources to invest.
Compared to a poorer country.
Exactly.
Did they account for that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They were very careful to control for those sorts of differences. They considered income levels. Technological advancements. Even things like consumer preferences.
Oh, interesting.
How easy it is for people to switch between products. When prices change.
That makes sense.
They wanted to make sure it wasn't just a side effect.
Right. Wasn't something else hiding in the data.
Exactly. And to do that, they used data from the International Comparisons Program to see how consumer behavior might influence which industries thrive.
So they were really trying to pinpoint
the effect.
The effect of the legal system.
Of the legal system.
And what did they find?
Even after all of that, the impact of rule of law remained strong and significant.
Right.
It was a powerful, independent force.
Wow.
Shaping the types of industries that could succeed in a country.
Okay. That's impressive.
It is impressive.
But how do you actually measure the impact of rule of law?
Right.
It still seems kind of abstract.
It is a tough one to measure.
Yeah.
So to do this, they built a model.
Okay.
And this model was designed to estimate how differences in rule of law affect the overall price level
Okay.
of goods and services.
So basically how efficiently
Yeah.
countries can produce
Precisely.
goods and services.
Are they wasting resources?
Yeah.
Are they using them effectively?
Got it.
And what they found was that countries with a strong rule of law
Okay.
tend to have lower prices
Okay.
for goods and services.
So they're more efficient
They're more efficient.
at producing stuff.
Exactly.
So if prices are lower,
Yeah.
people can buy more stuff.
Yeah, they have more purchasing power.
Leads to a higher standard of living.
Exactly. Higher real incomes.
Win-win.
When,
Win-win. But to make the model as accurate as possible,
right.
they needed to figure out
Yeah.
how easy it is for people to switch between products.
Right.
You know, if the price of coffee goes up.
Right. How quickly do people switch to tea?
Yeah, exactly. So how did they figure that out?
They went back to the International Comparisons Program. That data set was really useful for them
Okay.
because it has all this information on prices and spending
Okay.
for a ton of different goods and services
Across different countries.
across different countries.
Okay, so what did they do with all this information?
They built basically a virtual world
Oh, wow.
to test their ideas.
Okay.
So they took all this data,
Yeah.
they created a simulation where they could isolate the impact of rule of law
Right.
on economic output.
Got it.
And they were looking at a country's GDP
Okay.
relative to the United States
Okay, so using the U.S. as like a benchmark
as a benchmark.
to compare against.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the results
Yeah.
were pretty remarkable.
Okay.
Their model was able to predict a country's relative GDP
Uh-huh.
pretty accurately,
Based on their rule of law score.
based solely on the rule of law.
Wow.
There was a strong correlation.
So their model passed the test
Passed the test.
with flying colors.
What was even more impressive is that their model
Yeah.
was able to account for a big chunk
Okay.
of the variation in GDP
Okay.
between countries,
So how much are we talking?
somewhere between 36% and 46%
Wow.
of the difference in wealth between nations could be attributed to variations in their legal systems.
That's a lot.
It is a lot,
Okay.
but they didn't stop there.
Oh, there's more.
There's
I
more.
believed it.
I knew it.
You have a great memory.
You mentioned they also used Canada as a benchmark.
They did.
Mm.
They wanted to see if the results held up
Okay.
with a different benchmark.
Okay.
So Canada
Yeah.
has a higher rule of law score than the U.S.,
Okay.
but it's also a more open economy.
Okay, so trade is more important
Exactly.
to their economy.
So they wanted to see
Yeah.
if that would change things.
Okay. Did it.
Not really.
Okay.
Even with Canada as the benchmark,
Mm-hmm.
the model was still really accurate.
Okay.
It predicted relative GDP
Okay.
based on rule of law scores,
Okay.
and it still accounted for.
Yeah. Roughly 37%
Wow.
of the variation in GDP per capita.
Okay, so the findings seem pretty strong.
Very robust.
Robust, yeah.
They didn't stop there, though.
They didn't stop there. Oh my gosh, these guys are thorough.
You're thorough.
Okay, what else did they do?
They tested the model even further
Okay,
with a different data set.
okay,
This one focused on manufacturing,
right.
and this one allowed them to look at value-added shares
Okay,
instead of just employment shares.
okay.
So it's another perspective.
Yeah, another angle to look at.
Exactly. On how industries are structured.
And so did the model hold up
It did.
with this new data set?
Yeah.
Right.
Even when they focused on manufacturing,
Okay,
the model accurately predicted relative GDP
okay.
based on rule of law scores.
Based on rule of law, okay.
And it accounted for about 33%
Wow.
of the variation in GDP per capita.
The evidence just keeps stacking up
It does seem that way.
in favor of their hypothesis.
Yeah.
Rule of law matters.
Yeah. Rule of law seems to have a real impact
Yeah.
on economic structure.
And a country's overall prosperity.
Absolutely.
Wow, but I'm sure they didn't stop there.
You're right.
What other factors?
They wanted to be extra thorough.
Did they consider to really make sure their findings were solid?
They considered a lot.
Wow, they really went above and beyond to make sure their findings were rock solid.
They did. It's really impressive.
Yeah, it seems like they were really determined to get this right.
They were very thorough.
So they didn't want to just show that rule of law matters.
Right.
They wanted to understand how it actually impacts the economy.
Exactly.
And one thing they focused on
Yeah.
was what happens as countries get richer.
Right. Because as incomes rise,
Yeah.
people tend to buy different types of goods and services.
Right. They have more money to spend.
Exactly.
So that they have to, like, separate.
They had to make sure
Yeah.
that the changes they were seeing
Yeah.
in industry structure
Yeah.
weren't just because incomes were rising.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't just a side effect of that.
Exactly.
Okay, so how did they disentangle
Well, that's a great question.
the impact of rule of law
Yeah.
versus just, like,
Rising income.
Rising income.
So they did a few things.
Okay.
They directly controlled for income levels in their analysis.
Okay.
They also estimated how sensitive different industries are to changes in income.
Okay.
And they even used this really sophisticated model of consumer behavior to account for how incomes and preferences kind of work together.
Wow, that's...
They really wanted to be thorough.
They were very thorough.
They wanted to make sure they were isolating the impact of the rule of law.
Okay, so what did they find?
Well, it turns out that the income level of a country didn't seem to systematically favor or disadvantage industries that rely on those specialized investments.
So it wasn't just a case of
it wasn't just richer countries.
Richer countries naturally having
more complex industries.
More complex industries.
It seemed like the rule of law had a separate,
it's its own thing,
independent effect.
Wow, okay.
But they weren't done yet.
Oh, there's more.
There's one more big one.
Okay.
They had to address the possibility that something else entirely was influencing both rule of law and economic structure.
Right. So it could be a false connection.
A false connection.
Like correlation, not causation.
Exactly.
Okay.
So imagine you see that people who eat ice cream are more likely to get sunburned.
Right. Okay.
You can't assume
that ice cream causes sunburns.
Exactly. There's probably something else going on.
Right, like hot weather.
Exactly. A third factor.
Okay, that's a good analogy.
That's influencing both.
Okay, so how did they make sure
they had to rule that out?
That wasn't happening in their study.
Right. So they used a statistical technique called instrumental variables.
Okay.
It's a way of isolating the impact of one variable, like rule of law, while controlling for other hidden factors.
Okay, that makes sense.
That might be messing things up.
So even after considering all those potential issues,
all those potential pitfalls,
the connection between rule of law and the types of industries a country specializes in,
it was still there.
It was still there.
It was strong.
Wow.
Their findings were remarkably consistent.
But I'm sure every study has its limitations.
Of course, of course.
What were some of the limitations of this study?
Well, one thing they acknowledged is that measuring something like rule of law, it's inherently difficult.
Right. It's not like measuring the length of a table.
Exactly. You can't just...
get your tape measure out.
Exactly. You can't just get a ruler out.
Yeah.
So the measures they used are estimates. Right. And there's always a little bit of uncertainty there.
Right.
But to address that, they ran some tests to see how sensitive their findings were to those variations.
In the rule of law measurements.
Exactly.
And what did they find?
They found that their results held up, even if the actual rule of law scores were a bit different.
So they were pretty confident.
They were confident.
That their conclusions were still valid.
Exactly.
Okay. Any other limitations?
There was one other big one.
Okay.
They acknowledged that their model didn't explicitly account for what's called idiosyncratic risk.
Idiosyncratic risk.
That's the risk that a specific business might face.
Okay.
Because of things like partners breaking contracts or acting in bad faith.
Right. So a strong rule of law should reduce that.
It should, in theory.
But they didn't actually measure that directly.
Not directly, but they did say that they considered the possibility of those things in their analysis.
Okay.
So while they didn't directly model that specific type of risk, their model did reflect the ways in which a strong rule of law can create a more stable, predictable environment.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it seems like they made a pretty compelling case.
They did,
for this connection between rule of law, economic structure,
and prosperity,
and a country's overall prosperity.
Okay, so what are the implications of this research?
Well, I think it has some really important implications for policymakers.
Okay.
If a strong rule of law is so crucial for economic development, then we really need to figure out how to strengthen those legal systems.
That should be a top priority.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder, like, what are the specific things that governments can do?
Yeah, what can they do?
To create that more reliable and predictable legal environment.
What kinds of reforms, regulations, or anti-corruption measures would be most effective? Right. Those are the questions we need to be asking.
Yeah.
And while this research doesn't give us all the answers, it definitely gives us a much better understanding
of what's at stake.
It
really highlights the economic benefits that can come.
Absolutely.
From strong legal institutions.
It's not just about fairness and justice.
Yeah.
It's about
It's about
creating opportunity.
creating a system where businesses can thrive.
Exactly, where they can grow, innovate.
It's pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing.
But before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I know you have one final thought for us.
No, I do.
Okay.
This research focuses on the economic impact of rule of law.
Right. That's what we usually measure.
GDP, things like that.
How well a country is doing.
Exactly.
Right.
But economic development
Yeah.
is about more than just GDP.
It's about people's lives.
It's about improving people's lives,
Yeah.
creating opportunities, fostering well-being.
Creating a society where everyone can thrive.
Exactly.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So it leads to this question.
Okay.
Does a strong rule of law contribute to these broader aspects of human development?
That's a really good question.
It is a good question.
I mean, a fair and predictable legal system can definitely make people feel more secure.
Absolutely.
It can reduce corruption,
Yeah.
promote equal access to justice.
A level playing field.
Those things definitely contribute
Absolutely.
to a better quality of life.
So while this research focuses on the economic side of things, it also hints at this deeper connection
Between law and well-being.
between law and human well-being.
Wow.
A robust legal system might not just boost GDP,
Yeah.
it might create a more just and equitable society.
Where everyone has a chance to reach their potential.
Exactly.
It makes you think about, like,
It does.
what the real purpose of economic development is.
It's just
and how important it is.
absolutely
Like, to create a system that benefits everyone.
that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Yeah.
This has been such a fascinating dive.
It really has.
We've learned so much
About the hidden connections
between law and economics.
and how they shape the world around us.
It's really eye-opening.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And as always, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.